members in the room for your vote of confidence in this organization. Okay, now what you've here to see tonight. Octavio Solis is considered one of the most prominent Latino playwrights in America. With works that both draw on and transcend the Mexican-American experience, he examines the darkness, magic, and humor of humanity with brutal honesty and intensity, crossing cultural and aesthetic boundaries. His works include Alice's Miracle, Se llama Cristina, John Steinbeck's The Pasture of Heaven, Ghosts of the River, Quixote, Gibraltar, The Ballad of Pancho and Lucy, the Seven Visions of Encarnacion, Man of the Flesh, El Paso Blue, Santos and Santos, and many others. His plays have been mounted at the California Shakespeare Theater, Mark Taper Forum, Yale Repertory Theater, Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and other venues nationwide, including Strawberry Theater Workshop here in Seattle. Solis has received an NEA Playwriting Fellowship, the Kennedy Center's Roger L. Stevens Award, the TCG NEA Theater Artist in Residence Grants, the National Latino Playwriting Award, the Penn Center, and the USA Award for Drama, and many others. In other words, this is one pretty award-winning playwright. But he's here tonight to discuss this collection of essays and reflections about his life, Retablos, stories from a life lived along the border. Please join me in giving a warm town hall welcome to Octavio Solis.
Thank you, Edward, and thank you, Town Hall Seattle, for having me here as part of the Inside Out series. Thanks to the Rainier Arts Center also for having me here, and I'm pleased to be in Seattle. It's really interesting to kind of call these essays or reflections because I think of them as stories. Some people started marketing this book as a memoir, but I'm not interested in autobiography. I'm interested more in story. I've always been fascinated by story, and I thought I would look at some of the crazier, more surreal moments in my life growing up in El Paso, the moments that shaped me, shaped who I am, and framed them as stories. So that's where I went with this. Someone had asked Sam Shepard when he came up with one of his collections in print, whether they were poetry, whether they were personal recollections, whether they were stories, and he said, "It's just writing. It's just writing, man." And so I felt like that's what I have here. It's just writing. I started putting them together only within the last 2 years, but I actually wrote my first one like in 2011. And since then I've been writing them, and I always write them, they seem to come to me at odd times in the middle of the night. After I'm done working on a play or reading a book, they'll just come to me. And I thought if I didn't write them down, if I didn't write these events down, I would consign them to dreamland because they felt so much like dreams. But I gave myself permission to treat them like we treat dreams. Sometimes in recollecting a dream, we embellish it. We create the embroidery around the edges, and those places where there are holes, we invent something. So I gave myself permission to do that. This is the first one. It's called Retablos. And a retablo, by the way, is a kind of thank you note to the deity, to the divine, for interceding during a moment of crisis. It contains both narration that describes what that moment of crisis was, who they prayed for and prayed to, and then how they were delivered from that moment. And it also has a kind of drawing, a depiction of that, with a little image of either the Virgen de Guadalupe or some specific saint that they prayed to. And these are very popular in Mexican folk Catholicism. And they hire a kind of naive artist to kind of commemorate them on a piece of tin, and they either put them in the church or put them over their bed at home as a thank you note. And I thought of them as a a perfect device for me. They almost work like flash fiction, like an early form of flash fiction. Anyway, this is the first one. Retablos. This is me in my old room, unpacking my bags on the bed I slept in more than 30 years ago, hearing my mother titter at something on the TV while my dad is stirring the caldo de pollo on the stove. He blurts out something crude in Spanish, and now both of them are roaring big as life, filling the house with horsey laughter. Then it hits me. This is how one of them will cry when the other dies. I look out the window, and I'm 13 all over again, getting ready for school. A polar front blew in all the way down from Canada and locked us in an overnight freeze and didn't even have the manners to leave us any snow. Just the chill air and ice on the power lines. But as I come down the hall for my breakfast, I see my sister standing outside the maid's room, snarling something to herself. I ask her what happened, and she says, "The birds are dead." What? The birds are dead, she says again. I look in the room and I see the maid, this young Mexican girl of 20 we hired to watch the house and cook food for us while my parents are at work. I see her sitting on her bed with her face in her hands. Sobs and the words, "Perdón, perdón," are slipping through her fingers. While she wipes her snot on her sleeve, I look past her at the cage where my mom's canaries are supposed to be perched, but they're not there. I come closer and find them both balled up and lifeless on the newspaper floor of the cage. They were old, their yellow feathers faded white, inherited from my grandmother when she moved to Fresno, only now they are dead. My sister says the maid left the window open and they froze. They couldn't take the cold. She should have known. Now look at them, she says. I'm about to ask where Mom and Dad are, but then I hear them laughing in their room. Why would they be laughing? I cross the hall and open the door, which is weird because they hardly ever close the door in the morning once they're up. And there they are, sitting on the bed next to each other, hands on their brows, crying so boisterously it sounds like they're busting at the seams at some practical joke. It's unnerving. I've never seen them wailing like this, bent over and shaking, their mouths contorted, bawling like children. I've seen my mom cry a few times, but never like this. And never my dad, who's not the kind of man inclined to such displays of emotion. For a pair of old birds, no less. There's something ancient about the way their wails change them, even give the room a different light. I think this is a holy moment and close the door and leave them to their searing, sacred laughter. That's how they come, these memories. Like a set of retablos, votive images painted on old beaten tin, marked with the mystery of being, with acts of transgression recorded for those who need to remember. That's what revisiting El Paso is like for me. Like walking into a retablo with a rusty surface for a sky and misremembered family and friends for saints and supplicants, and the lost distilled moments of my border past for miracles. They come to me at the strangest times, as if to remind me that I have lived this much because of them. That's one of them. Some of these retablos take the form of a kind of character sketch, for lack of a better word. I mentioned that we had a maid, a young girl taking care of us. Well, in El Paso at the time, it was quite common for even poor Mexican families, if they had children, to hire a maid. Someone from Mexico usually, who needed the money and would live there and eat there, but also would be in charge of cleaning the place and preparing the food while the parents were both out working. Both my parents had to work while we were, the four of us, little kids running around. One of those maids was Consuelo, and she was a grandmotherly figure that we had working for us off and on for 6 years or so. And so this is a retablo about Consuelo. Consuelo. Her name is Consuelo, and she is our maid, our criada. She has something in her hands, a precious object. She comes down from the mountains of Mexico and takes a long bus ride to Ciudad Juarez. Then walking over the Santa Fe Bridge to El Paso, boards another bus that takes her along the curve of the lower valley to our house. She lives with us, this lady whom everyone thinks is our abuela, because like our abuela, she commands our respect and rouses our love. Setting up her meager belongings in a small room near the kitchen, her comb, her picture of San Martin giving a piece of his cloak to a mendicant, her rosary and her small crumbling Bible beside the single bed that used to be my little brother's. She puts on her simple country dress and her apron with homemade rickrack. She's small and stout, with strong bowed legs that carried her through the house she spends all day cleaning. Her face dark and furrowed, her hair silver and tightly braided into a plait that hangs down her back like a staff. Her hands rough and calloused as a man's. She cooks all our meals and calls for us when the plates are served. Wherever we are, we hear her summons and head for home. The food is so good that Kino and Marcos and the other kids want to play too. She feeds us, feeds the dog, feeds the canaries in their cage, then feeds herself. All we know is her name, which is consolation, which is perfect. Since that is what she brings to my parents, who bust their asses day and night to make ends meet, which they never do, these ends that barely even pass each other across the room. She grows yerbas in our backyard and makes healing soups and teas for us when we're sick. Sometimes, when she's alone, when a lull in her daily labors permits, she sits and watches the Canal 2 on TV, the Spanish language shows. At night, after we've all had our dinners and are getting ready for bed, she goes to her room with the door closed, sits on her bed with her open Bible and prays. There are times when she goes to see her family. She says she'll be gone 2 weeks, but 2 weeks can turn into 4 and then into 8 because of difficulties at home or crossing over issues. But 6 years of Consuelo, 6 years of her quiet folk singing as she hangs her clothes on the line, her sweeping the porch with that old broom, her stern admonishments for us for disrespecting our parents, 6 years of her practically raising us invokes the deep mestizaje that lives in our blood, that reminds us we come from something older, simpler, and richer than the privileges we think are owed to us in this land. This is a retablo of Consuelo, sitting on her bed with the door ajar, just enough for a 9-year-old to peer through. This old woman with her hair unbraided, loose all the way down to her lap, with the sacred object in the cradle of her hands. What can it be but the apple we threw away, which she retrieved, saying, "Waste nothing of God's," and took to her room. And here it is, this sunken, moldy apple, and Consuelo gingerly taking bites of it in the luminous mystery of faith. Thank you. I still visit my parents. They're still in the same house they were that I was raised in, which is less than a mile from the Rio Grande. And growing up, we saw the Border Patrol cruisers go by all the time. We saw undocumented people come crossing over the Rio Grande day and night, in the middle of the night. We saw them all the time, and we had personal encounters with them. And we thought ourselves separate from them in some respect, but we also always saw the Border Patrol as antagonistic, as the enemy. And so This is an occasion where I had a direct contact with La Migra, which is what we used to call the Border Patrol. And actually, some people still call them that. La Migra. That's what we called them. That's how I have always known them. La Migra is a derogatory term, but we don't even think of it like that. It's just what they are. Ever since we moved into the lower valley, the green and white cruisers of the Border Patrol have been everyday fixtures in our lives. In the early days, they are older guys who take their jobs in stride. They ride on patrol like hired cowboys roping in the errant dogies. Or maybe more like Texas Rangers patrolling the wild frontier. They know a large portion of the migrants will slip through their net, and they know many of those they catch will be back through the fence in a matter of days. They're philosophical about their mission. What's the harm in a few mojados coming through? Don't we need the manpower anyway? Then in the late 60s and early 70s, there's a new breed of officer. Stern, all-American types. Ex-soldiers who got their asses kicked in the jungles of Vietnam and now look to settle that score with these wetbacks and their smuggled Mary Jane. They take the job seriously, consider themselves a cut above the average city cop. What they do is harder and makes a bigger difference in the complicated world of La Frontera. That's my take on them anyway. I started noticing something else in the early 70s though. Maybe it was always there and I just didn't see it. Or maybe it's a result of the recession and the lack of good paying jobs. Suddenly, there are more Chicanos running the vans and cruisers. The iron in the faces, the edge in the eyes, it's all the same. Only now the faces and eyes are brown. The badges say Marquez, Armendares, Luján. Some are even rougher than their Anglo counterparts. Doesn't matter that their parents probably came over the same river with the same intention. One generation is all it takes to keep the past and the legacy of their migration at bay. They're American now, and this is how they show it. We're used to them, how they slow down whenever we're outside drinking Cokes by our bikes. The officer in his aviator sunglasses looks us over, scouring our skinny bodies for the one thing that marks us as foreign. Kino and I point to each other and mouth the words, "Take him, take him." My sister takes exception though. She thinks the border cop is checking her out, and she's probably right. But the fact he's even scrutinizing us this closely is disturbing. His look lingers just long enough to make us feel like strangers to ourselves. All the mojaditos that we generally scowl at when we spy them tramping restlessly past our house, he's consciously connecting them to us. We're nothing like them. We've conditioned ourselves to say, we're legal, born on this side. But the border cop, with his steady gaze, is telling us with his look that the distinction is very thin. Thin as the lenses on his aviators. Thin as a line on a map. This day, I am waiting for the bus to take me downtown to see a movie. The bus stop is just across the street from my house. The border patrol comes up the street and stops right at the curb. It's that Mexican officer again. And he's wearing the same reflective shades. His partner is this white guy who looks like he's been badly sunburned. Both of them are giving me a once-over that makes me nervous. It's the Mexican that talks to me. You seen anyone go by here lately? No. Anyone wearing a red tee? No. You're wearing a red tee. I look down at myself and look at the red t-shirt with the lettering of some band I used to think was bitchin'. Where you from, kid? He asks. Here? Where? America? Where do you live? Right there. I point at my house. What's the address? I recited for him like my life depends on it. Then he does something unexpected. He removes his shades and asks me, ¿Hablas español? Now, I'm trapped. I want to say no, even if it's a lie, because to admit that I speak Spanish would put me in the other guy's red tea. Just like that, he's made me ashamed of my original tongue, forced me to deny my father's language, and thereby deny my father and his fathers before him. And the crazy thing about it is, this man is using the very same Spanish against me. There's only one thing I can say. A little. ¿Quieres pasar tus días allí? What? You know what I said. No, sir. He smirks at my lie and looks me right in the face. Do you want to spend your days over there? I'm an American, sir. Barely. Where are you going? The movies? In my peripheral vision, I sense my mom at the front door, and the white officer nudges his partner, who puts on his aviators and tells me to keep an eye out for a mojado with a red t-shirt, which is what I see reflected in the lenses. If you spot him, you call us, okay? These guys are the butts of our jokes. Now they have me shaking all over. They say, have a good day, and drive on down the street. The bus comes right after they leave, and I go to my James Bond double bill at the Palace Theater downtown, and the whole time I'm watching the screen, I am hating these men and thanking them at the same time. Because they're right. I am the guy in the red tee. I am him. And he is me. Thank you. Retablos is also about family. And so, you always think, a book comes out and gets all these nice notices and all that. But there's collateral damage sometimes when one is writing about family. And there has been with this. But at the same time, it's with love that I wrote this for them. I wrote about some hard things in our family that were hard to even think about, much less write about. And revisiting wasn't easy. But there's redemption always on the other side. Mayhem and chaos are usually my bag. And it's hard to get out of that bag sometimes. But it seems like it's always worth it if there's redemption on the other side. This one's called Mexican Apology. Mexicans don't know how to say sorry. For one thing, we don't have the words in Spanish for it. Lo siento is what comes out. But that means I feel it. I know what you're feeling. I empathize. A true apology, though, that's hard to phrase in the Mexican mouth. Which is strange because sorry is what we're all about. In our backyard, having a glass of iced tea without the ice, I'm looking over the fence at the skinny brown kids riding their bikes to the bazaar being held in the church parking lot, like I used to do before my bike got stolen. The makeshift booths are already glowing with strands of tiny blinking lights. There's a DJ spinning discs for the gente who are throwing their dimes into cups for a chance at the Pink Panther plush toy. From where I stand, I see the sun's last oblique rays setting on the Loteria booth, where already someone in a flat nasal voice is calling out, La Sirena! La Sirena! Over the PA. For sure, mermaids in the middle of the desert might be common as priests, like the one strolling among the throngs, nodding this way and that, smiling at everyone, and placing the cup of his hand on the backs of the little ones' heads. All this is foreign to me now. All this is something I no longer want any part of. Some ugliness poisoned it for me years ago, and none of it holds any charm in my heart this time. My father comes out in his slippers, his bottle of Tecate foaming at the mouth. He holds it like a club and looks around for something to not talk about. He was born with an angry face, so even when he's pensive, he looks like he's about to slap someone across the cheek with a brick. He stands in his shorts and cotton shirt looking at the crowds milling through the bazaar, then takes a slug of his beer. The bottleneck is all knuckles when he drinks. Finally, he nods to me. I nod back, taking this as a sign that we could be exchanging more than nods pretty soon. I turn my back and look over the other fence at the scrappy tufts of grass in our front yard. The words, "not now," are riding the carousel in my head. Not now, not now, not now. I can feel him shuffling closer. The man who shares his name with me as the voice over the PA calls out another card. La escalera! The ladder. Our Mexican bingo doesn't mind mixing the mundane with the archetypal. It's all the same to us if we really think about it. All part of this hard life where the days pass like kidney stones and the nights are remembered for the sobbing and the cursing and the fist through the walls. He stops behind me where I can't see what he's looking at, but I know his eyes land on everything but me. I'm this blind spot he never figured out how to talk to. I think he's going to try now, though. A couple more shuffles and he's right beside me, resting his arms on the chest-high fence next to mine. We're both looking straight ahead at the slow parade of cars passing us on their way to the bazaar. The greasy smell of gorditas frying on the skillet lends a little grace to the moment, but only a little. We're both tense as fuck, standing in the waning light of a sun, sick and tired of our bullshit. I make out his profile against the wall of our casita. He's breathing into his huge hands like they're a pair of bellows. I used to believe I was another man's son. I used to think he took me as his when he married my mother. I used to think that for no other reason than I wanted to. After all, what the hell do we have in common except a roof and a name? I see his drawn, brooding features now, and no question about it. He's my jefito, and I'm his son. I was born with the same angry face. The voice in the PA announces the next card. El borracho. I'm thinking of all the things I need to tell him, because finally I'm big enough to take him on. I figure it will make my shit more justifiable if I turn into him for just this teenager moment. Let him see that angry face on me. What will you think of that, dear old pop? But then I wonder, what if this angry face is all he's ever seen? What if it's me who turned him this way? I wasn't all that great a kid to raise, was I? I had my ugly moments too. I'm trapped in 1,000 recriminations while behind us under the twinkling lights, families are placing their raw pinto beans on their loteria boards. Amid the din of the bazaar, with all the children laughing and the mothers calling and the fathers throwing gritos in the air, I hear him say 2 words. Not the words I expect, but the words of a Mexican beaten down and tethered to the sins of fatherhood. Era cabrón. The words rise from his knuckles. Words that translate into, I was a shit. I was not myself. I was something I won't be from now on. I crept all over your life even when I meant well, and I know it. I won't be that again. I'm your father, and today your father is a changed man. All in 2 words. They are as close to saying I'm sorry as anything in the lexicon of our culture. But it's the way his eyes skirt mine that tell me the staves of his heart are bursting with remorse, black and mean. I don't know if I look at him, but I do, I think. I nod again and say, "It's okay, Dad." Something in me wishes I didn't mean it, but I do, 'cause my own staves are cracking too. He looks around again for something to moor him, but nothing avails itself, so he leaves the beer on the fence and shuffles back inside. I stand there watching the cooling air scatter the cottonwood seeds across this tired old town. My eyes go to the bottle, and I see that he's only taken the one swig. Without even thinking about it, I take it by the neck and down one too, right from the same mouth. "El corazón," cries the PA. Thank you. That's that one. Can never predict how long these are going to be. Sometimes they end up being 10 pages, sometimes 5, and what I try to do is work to distill them so that they're really, really, really short and concise and dense and like a poem. I'd be fooling myself if I called this a poem, because I know real poets and real poems, and those are a distillation all their own. But that was a model that I used for this. Here's one about, a short one about my little brother. There used to be 5 of us in our family. But the brother after me, when I think I was 1 year of age, my mom's baby died from pneumonia, possibly a condition of malnutrition, etc. And so I wrote this for him. His name was Ernesto. And in Spanish, a nickname for Ernesto is Neto. And that's the name of this retablo, Neto. I have a brother who died before he reached his first birthday. I think I ran into him at the airport. I'm waiting this one afternoon for a flight at the El Paso International that keeps getting delayed every hour. I sit and put on my earbuds and listen to a random selection of electronica, jazz, maybe something ambient. There's a point where the sounds in your head synchronize with eye focus and everything drops into a general blur. I zone out like that for a minute when gradually I sense him sitting across from me. My brother. I know it's him because he looks like me, only a year younger, less gray in the hair, fewer wrinkles around the mouth, sleepy, self-assured eyes, a face that don't give a shit. I never really liked the phrase comfortable in his skin because I've never been comfortable in mine. But he is. The way he sits, the way his work boots sprawl toward me. I have my sunglasses on, which is how I size him up without him knowing. I notice a silver cross around his neck, the kind that is both tribal and religious. There are 4 or 5 tiny black tats on his hands. And though I can't see it under his clothes, I suspect he wears the Guadalupe Virgin over his heart. I can tell by the gentle curl of his lips that they're more accustomed to speaking Spanish than English. He has his own inaudible music playing in his head, and judging by the cadence in his nod, I guess it's the boleros of my mom's old records. He is all the Mexican I have tried to be but can't. Then, in that languorous haze, I see into his heavy-lidded eyes, and his essential nature lays itself bare. I'm a Sunday man, he says inside. I kneel when the Father says to. I love my women. I sin against them and never apologize for it, except by loving them more. I know all the ways of loneliness and all the ways to nurse it. I'm a night bird, my eyes attuned to the nuances of dark, and it's in that place I hide my saddest dreams, my delirious vices. Pain is grace. I don't know how not to do something, only that not doing it brings more regret than I can bear. Trouble's bitten me so many times, it's left black marks on my hands, marks that commemorate love and loss, and maybe an unborn child or two. I've seen death more than most, so count on me to be present at your last rites. That's how our blood must have it. I am a lived-in man. Your carnal, your bro. He cuts me a single glance that lasts as long as it takes to say his name, and his look says, 'cause I'm dead, I got permission to fuck my life up and still outlive you. A woman's voice says something over the intercom, and he gets up and walks to his gate, and I get up and walk to mine. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to read one more, and it's about one of the kids that was in our neighborhood, in our area where we lived, and it's titled Demon. And I'll close with this, and then we'll open it up to questions if you all want to ask any questions. Every corner of the world has its changeling, and demon broods in ours. With his solemn Mayan face sloping back to a scalp nicked with the hieroglyphs of old corrections, his eyes crossed and bloodshot, he is the oldest of our tribe, the smallest, and the least capable of grasping the long straws of his simple life. When my parents move us to a house just half a mile from the Rio Grande, it doesn't take long for us to meet the other kids in the area. Striking friendships we think will last forever. We play street football, ride our banana seat bikes up and down the dried irrigation ditches, played hide and go seek till nightfall, and liven up our summers with snow cones and monkey shines. Somehow, Demon is a part of all that. He just shows up one night and sits down with us while we tell ghost stories. He doesn't say a word, just sits on our porch and nods like a monk every now and then. I see his dirty scabbed elbows and his hands, small and calloused as a rancher's, and wonder what he's been through. When my mom calls us in, he abruptly jumps to his feet and shuffles off. Who's he? I asked Kino, one of our newfound camaradas. That's Demon. Demon? A toda madre. He's cool. What's his real name? Kino thinks for a second. I don't know. Where does he live? Somewhere over there, I think. For a few days, nobody sees him around. We don't really miss him, but we wonder about him anyway. Then he'll turn up like he was always there. I'll spot him from the back seat of the car, trudging along Alameda Street in a pair of stiff jeans too big for him. There goes Demon, I say to Mom and Dad. Pobrecito, my mom says back. We all kind of know something's not right with Demon, but nobody mentions it. We treat him like one of the team, except when we want to play dare. We dare him to do the riskiest shit because we know he'll always comply. He'll jump into Mr. Martinez's yard to steal some peaches from his tree for us. He'll throw water balloons at the border patrol vans for us. He'll run to the girls from down the street to ask if they'll hike up their dresses for us. He'll get into some ugly fights too. He takes on kids bigger than him, and even when he's losing, he doesn't quit. He's fearless, but he always does the things that we'd never dare anybody, like suck enamel spray off a sock for hours at a time. I catch him once, crouched in a culvert, rattling that ball bearing in a can of semi-gloss white. When I ask him what he's doing, he shrugs and does that thing with his mouth that he thinks is a smile and shoots some spray into a tube sock. Then he turns away and inhales it with an audible hiss. I see him teeter on his haunches for a long minute, his head bobbing on his shoulders like it's about to come off. And I guess that's one of the reasons people call him Demon. He doesn't seem to go to school because we don't see him in any of our classes. And by the time we get to high school, we don't see much of each other either. We outgrow our demon days. Meanwhile, he becomes a solitary urchin roaming the hood with a rag and pail, asking people if they want their car washed. Later on, he'll give up the pail and just ask people for change. But I'm not thinking about that. I'm 3/4 through my freshman year at Riverside High, and I've been seeing this girl. She lives far out in the Isleta School District, and I have to hop a bus to see her. We talk a little on her porch with the light out, and then spend the next hour or so kissing and feeling each other up. We get to the point where we can't go any further without doing something stupid, and then we say goodnight. I walk back to the bus stop and ride the long dissatisfaction home. The bus stops near midnight in Alameda, and I get off and start walking down my street. There's no moon in sight, and the trees throw dense shadows in my path. I hear the chink, chink of a keychain, someone walking behind me, and I think maybe some vatos in their gang are looking to jump me. I quicken my pace. Then I hear my name called in a dull, syrupy voice I haven't heard in years. I slow down to let Demon catch up. I can't see his face, but I know it's him. He's wearing his jacket zipped up and the same stiff pair of old jeans bunched up at the ankles. Hey, Demon. ¿Cómo te va, güey? I'm nervous around him for no reason, but I tell him I'm fine and ask him where he's been. Por aquí, por allá. Yeah, I've been around too. I just came from my girlfriend's house. Oh, see? He asks that in such an oblique way, like he wants to know more, like maybe he doesn't know what a girlfriend is. Maybe he just wants to make conversation. I tell him I almost did it with this girl. I tell him she's crazy beautiful and we're all hot and heavy for each other, but I don't know if it'll work out because she lives so far. Muy lejos. All the way to Isleta, I tell him. He stops and looks in the direction that I'm pointing. Then he says, that ain't far away. It is far, Demon. Almost every week I walk that to see my tia. Your aunt lives out there? No, she's dead. She's buried in Socorro. Oh, I'm sorry, Ese. He explains to me that he's not. He explains that his mother didn't want him, and it was his aunt that raised him from a baby, but she didn't take care of him like she was supposed to. He had some checks coming every month from the government, and Tia kept all the money. Now she's gone too, and all he has is her grave to visit. Pues, why do you go? He shrugs and holds his hand to his chest like his heart's about to leap out. I think of all the things we made him do, all the dares he undertook to be one of us, and how none of it made a difference anyway. Because look where we are now. He comes back around to the subject of my girlfriend and remarks that it's not the distance I'm afraid of, it's her. What do you mean? You're scared you might do it with her way, and then you'll have a baby, and he's going to take care of that shit, right? ¿Verdad? I'm about to tell him he's wrong, that there are lots of guys out there who married really young and started families, and they still get to follow their dreams, even if their dreams are small time and probably hamstrung by family concerns. But he stops and mutters, hey, in the thick, syrupy, sleepy voice, and unzips his jacket a little as he gestures me toward him. With some apprehension, I look in the crook of his jacket, and I think I see something moving, but it's too dark to see what. I'm afraid it might be some ugly thing he saved up just for me. But then he opens his jacket wider and shows me a small bird, a sparrow, nestled in his chest. It seems so still and unreal, but when I reach my hand in, it flutters weakly against his shirt. Where'd you get it? I found it. Its wing is broke. A cat almost got it. What are you going to do with it? He tells me he's going to take care of it till it heals, and then he's going to let it go at his aunt's gravesite. I tell him it's a real decent thing to do and that I hope it heals quick. He nods more times than he should and then starts veering off to wherever his house is, wherever forgotten changelings go. But there's still something I have to know. Demon, what's your real name? He stops in the middle of the dark street and turns around. He waits a while like he can't believe I asked that question. I hear the bird against his chest. You already know it, he says. I can't see his face, just the outline of that large tapered head. But I think he's doing that thing with his mouth that he thinks is a smile. Chink, chink goes his keychain. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it very, very much. Thank you. Thank you. Now we go on to the question and answer segment of this. So if any of you have any questions, I'd be happy to field anything you have, any questions at all.
If anyone has a question, just a reminder to use this microphone and to form your question in a form of question, just so we can get to as many folks as possible. And after the question and answers, we will be selling books. Thank you for coming.
Please come up and ask. I've been like doing research on your questions. Studying. I've been studying. Thank you.
Bueno, I guess I just have a question just about I feel like right now these stories are so relevant in terms, they've always been relevant, but just in terms of how media is kind of picking up the borderlands and the violence. So I guess I'm just wondering what it's like as a Latinx, Latino man to kind of share these stories like in white spaces and what that's like for you having to write your trauma and stuff. I was just wondering if you could speak to that.
Well, I think because of my standing in the academic and artist community and because of the way I sound, I think people have assumed that I have led a rather privileged life. And it hasn't been that privileged. I always thought that what we lived was a middle class life in our house. But our house was tiny. It was no bigger than, I think, this stage. And we didn't think of ourselves as poor, but once I spent an appreciable amount of time somewhere else, I saw that, oh my gosh, I had a very, very different life than other people did. So in writing these, I wasn't thinking solely of sharing these with people who are like me, other Mexicanos or Latinos, etc. But I wanted to share with everyone because I think they need to see how we live, how our lives are, and how often there are resonances in their lives as well. We don't live separate lives. We think we do, but we don't. We often have the same sort of thing. So I wrote this for everyone. I wanted to share this with people who are different than me, so that they can see where, by hearing this and creating a geography, they can see where they fit in it, and how maybe there were places where they went that reflected the same kind of geography. So I thought I think that's part of the reason why I wrote this and why I was so interested in not telling, this is me, this is my story. These are stories about El Paso and about what it's like to live along the border at a very particular time. And hopefully the resonance is with today as well. Hopefully, Good. Another one? Anyone else? Sir? Hi.
So you're very well known as a playwright. You've been writing plays for years. How is it different writing narrative? And do you see yourself moving in that direction? What's the experience?
Wow. Yeah, that's a good question. Both these questions actually were really quite good. But this is one I've been thinking about because I never thought this was in me. I've always sort of admired fiction writers and poets and envied them greatly. But I thought I had found my niche and that was where I was going to stay. But these started coming out, and they started coming out as in prose. And I said, I should be turning these into plays. But every time I tried, they didn't fit that. They didn't fit that mold at all. They weren't dialogue heavy, for one. I think that the last one I wrote with Demon that's the most dialogue I think you'll find in any of the retablos. And then the one with my father, I think it was like a line. He said one thing and I said another, and that was it. And there's something really liberating though about that, which means I can paint the scenery. It doesn't. Whoops. Sorry. It doesn't have to just. It doesn't have to be parsed out to like a scenic designer and scene painters. It's me. I'm doing it with language. I'm painting. I'm doing that work. And that's what makes me feel more like a true writer. I tried doing that in my plays. I try incorporating what people should see inside their mind's eye in the language and the text of the plays I write, which makes my plays seem less realistic in the end than others because people don't talk that way in real life. But they do in my plays. In this sense, it just meant that I could really indulge with it. I could take a whole page to describe what Demon looks like or what Consuelo's looks like and not have to worry about dialogue. The other thing that was, I thought also liberating is that it was just me and the page. And then once I was done, it was me, the page, and an editor who became very intimate with me over the year that we spent editing and proofing and rewriting. It was just us. Whereas in the theater, you're writing something that everyone's going to put their fingers on all over. Their imprints have to be on the play if it's going to work. If you just write the play and don't allow anyone to in the collaboration process, then you should be just a writer, like in these books, because in theater you must collaborate, and I've been doing that I think so well over the last 35 years, and I enjoy that process. But I think I was ready for something else. I was ready for this kind of communion with myself and these characters and this world, and it felt very liberating to be able to do that. Does that help? Yeah, absolutely. And also the other thing I was going to say is it's more personal. I knew it was going in a more personal direction, and these came out like in the dead of night, listening to old ghosts, including my younger self, and I felt like I needed to keep that close. I didn't want people rewriting my work and saying, this line should be more like this. How about if you change this line to that? And, it just felt like just a little more intimate in the end.
So when you were growing up and your early, like in high school or grade school, how did you end up, how was that as developing how you to be a writer, or did you have any kind of influence? Did you have any specific people that influenced you or gave you encouragement, or maybe talk about that?
Oh, yes. In elementary school and especially in middle school, or what we used to call junior high, we got into Edgar Allan Poe, and we got into Jane Eyre and the Gothic literature of the Bronte sisters and all that, and Frankenstein. And I was also into monster movies the old Universal horror movies that had Dracula, the Wolfman, Frankenstein. That's where I ended up relating a lot more to the monster than I did to the heroes, to the heroes in the story, because they just were outsiders, and I felt like such an outsider, in the same way that Rochester and Jane Eyre is such an outsider, in the same way that Poe himself and his consciousness is also an outsider. And all of these ended up just fueling me so much, and I was writing a lot. But then in high school, and there's a retablo in the book there about this specific time. I got placed in a drama class in my sophomore year, and I really did not want to be there. But they made me audition for The Diary of Anne Frank, and my life changed at that point. I didn't know that a world like that was possible. And I said, this is it. This is what I'm going to do the rest of my life. I'm going to be an actor. An actor. I mean, there was, ooh, now I almost dropped this. I'm moving this a little further. I wanted to be an actor. And I studied that for all those years. The whole time I was, it was like there was this screen between one part of my brain and another. There was this one that was like on this track to like become the next Robert De Niro, and there was this other one that was quietly reading poetry and novels and fiction and Steinbeck and writing my own stories and writing my own poetry. But occasionally something in the high school literary journal would appear, literary magazine, one in college, but I didn't ever connect the two. I just never thought of it. I thought, this is a hobby. This is my vocation. And then when it came time, I had to put the two of them together, and it just like, I put peanut butter in my chocolate and chocolate in my peanut butter. And it's like, oh, wow, writing for the stage. How about that? And that was the awakening that I had. And that happened in my mid-20s when I tried to develop an acting career on my own and wrote plays to feature myself. And people became more interested in the writing than they did in my acting. And you get the hint after a while when they start going, oh yeah, your acting's okay, but the writing's interesting. See more of that. Less of you on stage. So this is it. This is how I get to act on stage, by reading from Retablos, and believe me, I'm quite happy doing that. But that was the track I was on for like 7 years, 8 years, even longer, before I finally made the transition to writing. But since then, all my heroes have been in the world of theater. Sam Shepard, Maria Irene Fornes. These are my heroes, and they even go back to like the early guys, the old dead guys like William Shakespeare. He's still sort of a model. He sort of was my first teacher. But I have new models now, new people that I look for that are purely in the writing world, that are novelists and poets, and the list is long. I don't even know where to go there. But growing up, it was these Gothic writers, Poe and the Brontes. They were wonderful, and they were a way for me to kind of deal with my isolation and loneliness. These dark moods that I would go in. It was great. I was goth before there was goth. I was goth before there was goth, yes. Another question, please? No? Oh, hello.
Hi, thank you for sharing. So you touched a little on Border Patrol and the border and the feeling of being on the border, and in thinking now of the continued kind of militarization happening down there, and now there's ICE agents and SWAT gear on the Santa Fe Bridge where Consuelo crossed. And so I guess my question is, have you been home recently or over the years, and what has that experience been like? And maybe you could speak to. to that?
Yeah, I wrote in my introduction that, I've been writing plays about the border and the vagaries and complications of the border since like the late 80s. And people are rediscovering those plays now and going, hey, this is relevant, but he wrote this 15, 20 years ago. And they're discovering them now, and I appreciate that. But in this introduction, I wrote that the shit on the border never changes. There will always be people who want to come over and people who don't want them to come over, who try to put up barriers. But I've been made a liar, because since I wrote that, they've put children in cages, and they've really put the U.S. military on the border, and they've made it an incendiary, ugly scene in ways that it has never been before. They've escalated it to a degree. But as in El Paso, since I think the mid-'80s, we've had a wall. The wall's been there. It's been there this whole time. Big, ugly, nasty-looking wall right along the Rio Grande, and they graced it also with a 6-lane freeway going along it, just to make it that much harder for people to get across. And it wasn't like that before, and it hasn't slowed the traffic, illegal or legal, in one way or the other at all, because they find ways around it. Usually, mainly they just came through the checkpoints. They still come through the checkpoints. They find ways. So that wall is there, and it's got sensors, satellite dishes, cameras everywhere. It's still there, and it doesn't make a difference. It's hardly made a difference. Generally, people are coming over less because they don't want to, because the economy is getting better and better in Mexico, a bit at a time. They were trying to come over in the 2000s and the 90s when the cartel wars were going on, and it was nasty. There was an ironic thing in that Juarez, at one point, had over 3,000 murders in 1 year. This is a city right across El Paso. That same year, El Paso was voted by Condé Nast the safest city in America. Like 2 murders in a year or something like that, something outrageous, the safest city. So it's a strange dichotomy of things. I see that. I don't see the Border Patrol patrolling as much anymore, but they're still there. I think I'm immune to that they see me and that I'm fine. But one of the last times I was at El Paso International Airport, the Border Patrol is there. And they pulled me aside and they went through the checklist of, where were you born? Can I see your ID? Da-da-da. What's your business? Da-da-da. The whole thing. And I wanted to tell them, look, I have an MFA. Come on, you motherfuckers, I have an MFA. And I was so furious, but I just kept thinking, these poor guys look embarrassed, and they're doing their job because that's what they're paid to do. They're told to do this. So I just said, just comply, because if I start raising hell, they'll probably run me in and I'll miss my flight. So, just when you think you're beyond it, and above it, there's that reminder that says, nope, you look like them. And if you look like them, you're subject to search and seizure, just like anyone else that is subject to that. And those are things that are like part of daily existence. Now, who knows, in El Paso it may be changing because the demographics are like hugely in favor of Latinx people. They're large. The population is so much larger. And my wife happened to mention that the last time we were there, even the white people speak with a Spanish accent. They all talk the same way. They have that El Paso accent. I fall into it when I'm reading my stories. My whole acting training had it exercised, but when I go and revisit El Paso, it comes out when I read these, or when I've had something to drink, like something to drink. But Does that sort of address your question a little bit? I really wish I could, you know. I just know that that things will die down, and they have to die down, and they'll find some immigration reform, some Band-Aid to it, but they won't really address at heart what is the issue, and that's that there are so many people who are from Mexico already here, and they just want to keep the population down so that they don't become the dominant demographic in this country. But that's going to happen. That's going to happen. The year that President Trump was elected, 2016, was the first year that more babies of color were born than Anglo children, Anglo babies. So already that's a sign. But a lot of my retablos do address, this is only one instance with the immigration issue. There's several others that are there that deal with that. It's just a condition of life there. We're all kind of, we feel that scar. We're scarred by that whole border thing, all of us one way or another. Another question? Yes.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question about language, and I wonder if any of your retablos came to you in Spanish initially, and if so, if you find any limitations in writing in English.
No, my limitations are in Spanish, unfortunately. Spanish was my native language. It's what I spoke first, but television was my teacher. Television, everything from Bewitched to the Rat Patrol to Low Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, My Sweet Bippy, everything. That's what taught us English. That's how we learned, and we were so eager to learn it. My parents were very eager to have us learn it because they said this is the way to get ahead. Even though they knew that it was kind of putting us at a remove from them. There was a gulf between us and them. I'm happy to say that both my parents learned English too, especially my mom. She's very adept at it. But at some point, I know when I've lost my mother tongue, when I no longer dream in Spanish. And I stopped dreaming in Spanish sometime in my 20s. And everything about my Spanish is now because of a concerted effort to regain it, not to retain it, but to regain it, because I've lost a lot of it. And so I'm trying to learn a lot of it back. But we freely moved from English to Spanish in where we lived in our neighborhood. We didn't even think of it as a different tongue, but it was what you would call Spanglish. And actually, there's a particular kind of patois that is so uniquely Pachuco talk, this Pachuco language, where we have our own special vocabulary that is not Spanish. They're not Spanish words, and they're not English words. They're something that is distinct and unto itself, part of our culture. And it was everywhere. We all spoke that, but we're losing it because culture changes. Culture has to sort of change with the times. But like, for instance, and it's in Retablos, there's a chapter about this. We used to call cars ranflas. Bicycles were also ranflas. Shirts are lisas. Shoes are calcos, los calcos. The girlfriend was a jaina, or a boyfriend was a jaino. No, not jaino. But I know girlfriends were called jainas. We used to call the cigarette a frago. Mota, of course, for pot. There were all these words, and of course, chante. Chante meant house, your home, your chante, like calling it your crib, so to speak. And I always wondered where that came from. And then I learned not too long ago that it was a corruption or a development of the word shanty, because the laborers who worked at the sawmills would live in the shanty towns, in los shanties, in los shantes, and that it just became a name for your house. No matter how good or how beautiful and large your house was, it was still your chante, your shanty, your particular shanty. That's where it originated from. And that patois, that's Chicano speak, is evoked in this book, because I feel like it's so important. I feel like it's like we were doing what Shakespeare was doing with language when he was writing these plays, because he was inventing language. He couldn't find the right word to rhyme with this, so he just made it up. He just would make a compound word up and just or find a way to say it without all this prefix things, and he'd just reshape it, and pretty soon it would be the first recorded notation or example of that word written in the English language. And it was, he was doing all this because he didn't have a Roget's Thesaurus. He didn't have thesaurus.com. He didn't have the OED. It had yet to be put together. And I feel like we were doing that same thing too. That's a particular genius about living on the street, living in that in-between zone between English and Spanish, America, Mexico, first world, third world. It's its own zone, its own frontier, its own country. I would say the same thing is true for like the Mexico side in Juarez. People are very different there than they are in the rest of Mexico. It has its own zone, its particular special zone. And I'm ultimately, I think, writing for an English-speaking audience with retablos, and that's also true of my plays. But I think people who are Spanish speakers would get it. I think they would get it. Yes.
Unfortunately, because of time, that's going to be the last question.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
But thank you so much.
When we sign up there, you can ask the question.
Yeah,
Be
so we
happy
will
to
have
field
a
it.
signing in the back there and books for sale. Thank you so much.
I should go there, huh? All right. Thank you all. Appreciate it very much.